The ominous beginning mountains have always been places of wonder, adventure, and mystery. They stand tall, silent witnesses to centuries of history, holding secrets within their rugged slopes. Some believe mountains are sacred, others think they are cursed. But those who have ventured into their depths know that sometimes they are simply haunted. This is the story of Ethan Carter, an experienced climber who had spent years conquering peaks across the world. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened on Black Ridge Peak, a mountain known for its treacherous cliffs and eerie past. It was a cold autumn morning when Ethan and his three climbing partners, Mark, Julian, and Sophia, set off on their expedition. Black Ridge Peak was infamous for its extreme weather shifts and strange disappearances over the years. But to seasoned climbers like them, it was just another challenge. The journey began well. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. The sky was a crisp blue, and the ascent was challenging but manageable. They joked, took pictures, and pushed forward through the icy terrain. But as they climbed higher, an uneasy feeling settled in. The first omen. By the time they reached 3,500 meters, the temperature had dropped significantly, and the wind howled through the cliffs. That's when Sophia noticed something strange. "There's someone up there," she whispered, pointing toward a narrow ridge ahead. The others followed her gaze. At first, they saw nothing, but then, in the distance, a dark figure stood near the edge of a jagged rock formation. It was motionless, watching them. "Could be another climber," Mark suggested, adjusting his gloves. Julian shook his head. No one else was supposed to be on this route today. The figure didn't move, didn't signal, didn't react, just stood there. As the team moved closer, a sudden gust of wind kicked up a blinding wave of snow and ice. When their vision cleared a few seconds later, the figure was gone. "There's no way someone could have moved that fast," Sophia muttered, her breath visible in the freezing air. Ethan remained quiet, his gut telling him something was off. Whispers in the wind. As night approached, they set up camp on a flat ledge, sheltered from the wind. The stars were breathtaking, but the beauty of the moment was overshadowed by an unnerving silence. "I don't like this place," Julian admitted as he zipped up his sleeping bag. Ethan sat by the fire, staring into the darkness. The mountain felt alive, as if something was lurking just beyond their vision. Then, in the dead of night, they heard it. A faint, raspy whisper carried by the wind. It wasn't the sound of the wind whistling through the rocks. It was different. It was a voice. Ethan sat up instantly, his heart pounding. He wasn't alone. Mark and Sophia had heard it too. "What the hell was that?" Sophia whispered. "Probably just the wind," Julian mumbled sleepily, turning over. But Ethan wasn't convinced. The voice had been too clear, almost as if it was speaking right into his ear. The whispers continued on and off throughout the night. Sometimes they were soft and distant, other times sharp and urgent. They seemed to be saying something, but no one could make out the words. Then, at exactly 3:13 a.m., something even stranger happened. The tent zipper began to move, slowly, carefully, as if someone or something was trying to get in. Ethan froze, gripping his flashlight. The others were still inside, accounted for. No one had moved. Holding his breath, he unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. His heart nearly stopped. Standing just a few feet away, barely visible in the dim moonlight, was the same figure from earlier. No face, no features, just a dark silhouette. Then, without a sound, it disappeared. The night felt endless after that. No one slept. The whispers eventually faded, but the fear remained. By sunrise, they had made a decision. They had to keep moving, but something was waiting for them further up the mountain. Little did they know, the worst was yet to come. Vanishing climbers, the morning sun rose over Black Ridge Peak, casting an eerie golden light over the frozen slopes. But for Ethan and his team, there was no warmth in its glow. No one had spoken much after the incident last night. They all felt it, the weight of something unseen watching them. The whispering wind that carried voices instead of silence. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, forcing confidence into his voice. Mark nodded, tightening his climbing gear. "Let's just get this over with." They packed up quickly, but Julian seemed different. He was quieter than usual, his movements slower. "You okay?" Sophia asked, nudging him. Julian hesitated before shaking his head. Did any of you hear your name last night?" The group fell silent. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked carefully. Julian swallowed hard. "The whispers. They were saying my name. Over and over." Julian, come up." Sophia and Mark exchanged uneasy glances. I thought I was dreaming," Julian admitted. "But when I opened my eyes, I swear I saw someone standing outside my tent, just watching me." Ethan felt his stomach turn. "Someone? Or something?" "Let's just move," Mark insisted. "We can talk about this after we get off this damn mountain." And so they climbed. Something in the snow. At around 4,200 meters, the path narrowed into a jagged ridge. One wrong step, and it was a deadly drop into the abyss. The wind had picked up again, howling through the cliffs like a warning. Sophia led the way, Ethan close behind. Julian and Mark followed. That's when Sophia suddenly stopped. "There's something ahead," she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze. At first, it looked like a pile of old gear buried in the snow. But then he saw it. Fingers. A hand was sticking out of the frozen ground. Mark and Julian hurried forward, and together, they dug through the ice. Within moments, they uncovered what was beneath. A body. It was a man, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror, mouth open in a silent scream. His climbing gear was torn, his jacket shredded. But the strangest part? There were no footprints around him, no signs of an avalanche. It was as if he had been placed there, deliberately. Sophia gasped. "Oh my God, is that—" Julian stepped back, his face pale. "I've seen him before. His picture was in the lodge. That's Paul Reiner." Ethan felt his blood run cold. Paul Reiner had gone missing 3 years ago while climbing this same route. His body was never found. Until now. Mark checked for any remaining signs of life, but it was useless. Paul had been dead for a long time. "We need to report this," Mark said. Ethan agreed, but deep down, something felt wrong. This man hadn't fallen. He hadn't frozen to death while trying to descend. It was as if something had hunted him down and left him here as a warning. Julian's disappearance. The group pressed on, but the atmosphere had changed. They moved faster now, eager to escape the mountain's grip. Then, Julian started acting strange. At first, it was small things. He would stop and stare at the distance, as if listening to something. His breathing became more labored. He kept muttering under his breath. "Julian, what's wrong?" Sophia asked, touching his arm. He flinched away, eyes wide. "They're calling me." Ethan grabbed his shoulder. "Who?" Julian stared past them, his pupils dilated. "Paul. He says I have to follow him." A gust of wind howled past them, and in that moment, something moved in the distance. A figure, barely visible through the falling snow. It stood farther up the mountain, just watching them, waiting. And then, before anyone could react, Julian turned and ran straight toward it. "Julian!" Ethan shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. Julian sprinted toward the figure, disappearing into the fog. The others ran after him, screaming his name, but when they reached the spot where he had been, he was gone. There were no footprints leading away. No sign of a fall, no noise, just empty, untouched snow. A silent warning. For a long moment, no one spoke. Sophia trembled. "This isn't possible. Where did he go?" Mark paced in circles, running his hands through his hair. "He was right there. He ran. He couldn't have just vanished." Ethan clenched his fists. He knew the truth. Julian hadn't just run away. Something had taken him, and then, as if to confirm his fears, the wind whispered again. But this time, it wasn't Julian's name. It was his own. "Ethan. Ethan. Come up." To be continued. Cursed peaks, the wind howled through the jagged cliffs, its cry twisting into something almost human. Ethan, Sophia, and Mark stood frozen where Julian had vanished, staring at the untouched snow. No footprints, no sign of a fall, just emptiness. Ethan's heart pounded. "This isn't possible." Sophia wiped her face with shaking hands. "We have to go after him." Mark spun around, panic creeping into his voice. "Go where? There's nothing there." He ran, and then he stopped, unable to finish his sentence. They all felt it. Something had taken Julian. The whispering shadows. The mountain was silent except for the wind, but now it didn't feel like mere wind. It felt like voices, speaking just beneath the surface of the air. Mark turned away, muttering, "We need to get off this mountain, now." Ethan wanted to agree, but something inside him resisted. Julian was still out there. "What if he's still alive?" Ethan asked. "What if—" Then they heard it. A distant scream, Julian's voice. "Help! Ethan! Help me!" Sophia gasped. "That's him!" Mark hesitated. "It doesn't sound right." Ethan's blood turned to ice. He understood what Mark meant. Julian's scream was off. It was too clear, too distant, like a recording played on the wind. Then came another whisper. "Ethan, come up." It was the same voice Julian had heard before he ran. And now it was calling Ethan. He took a step back, his instinct screaming at him to run. But before he could say anything, Sophia grabbed his arm. Look! High above them, standing on the next ridge, was a figure. At first, it looked like Julian. Same build, same height. But then it moved. And Ethan knew that wasn't Julian. The figure stood completely still, except for its head, which tilted unnaturally far to one side, as if studying them. Its face was wrong. Its eyes were too dark, and its mouth. It was smiling. A slow, stretching, impossible smile. The ascent into madness, the team broke into a sprint, rushing away from the figure, slipping on ice and stumbling over rocks. The air grew thinner, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The higher they climbed, the more the mountain seemed to warp around them. The snow was too white. The shadows were too long. Sophia stopped suddenly. Wait, this isn't the right path. Ethan turned. She was right. They had been climbing for hours, but somehow they were still in the same spot. Mark spun in circles, disoriented. No. We should be near the next base camp. Ethan checked his GPS. The screen flickered. The map was frozen. Something's wrong, he muttered. Then came the whispers again. This time, they were closer. Ethan turned just in time to see a shadow move behind a nearby rock. Sophia sucked in a sharp breath. Did you see that? They weren't alone. Something was hunting them. And then they saw the footprints, but they weren't their own. The vanishing camp. They finally reached a clearing where their next base camp should have been. It was gone. The tents, the equipment, everything had disappeared. Only one thing remained. A single tent, half buried in the snow. But it wasn't their tent. It was old, weathered, and torn, like it had been abandoned years ago. Mark hesitated. What the hell is this? Ethan stepped forward and unzipped the flap. Inside was a notebook. Its pages were yellowed, brittle, and stained with something dark. Ethan picked it up and read the first page. Blackridge Peak is cursed. If you're reading this, it's already too late. The Lost Expedition. Ethan flipped through the pages, his hands shaking. The diary belonged to a climber from 1998 named Daniel Reeves. The last entry sent chills down his spine. Paul Reiner went missing today. He heard his name being called and wandered into the storm. We tried to find him, but he was already gone. Then we started seeing things. The mountain doesn't let you leave. It plays tricks. It takes your name. If you hear it, run. Paul Reiner. The same climber they had found frozen in the snow. Ethan's mind reeled. That meant Paul had heard the whispers before he disappeared. Just like Julian. Just like Ethan. A warning too late. Sophia backed away from the diary. We need to go. Now, Mark nodded. Screw this. We find another route down. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain wasn't done with them yet. The whispers returned louder this time. More voices. More names. Sophia gasped. It's saying my name. Ethan heard his own name too. Mark stumbled backward. Don't listen. Don't listen. Then, the wind changed direction. And through the swirling snow, the figure returned. Standing right where Julian had disappeared. Only this time, there were more of them. The figures stood in a line, their heads tilted, their mouths stretched into unnatural grins. Their voices rose in unison. Come up. Ethan realized, too late, what the diary had warned them about. The mountain was alive, and it wanted them to stay, forever. Cursed peaks, the descent that never ends. The mountain wind screeched like a living thing, a voice made of ice and hunger. Ethan, Sophia, and Mark stood frozen in terror, their eyes locked on the figures standing in the snow. They looked human at first, but their bodies were too still, their heads tilted too far to the side, their smiles stretched too wide, and their eyes were empty. Then, they moved. No way down. Mark grabbed Ethan's arm. We run, now. Sophia hesitated. What if Julian is still alive? Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew the truth. Julian was gone. The figures took a step forward, their bodies unnaturally slow, but the distance between them closed too quickly. They weren't walking. They were shifting, like shadows flickering through reality itself. Ethan broke into a sprint. Move! The three of them raced down the icy slope, their boots barely finding grip on the snow. But the mountain was changing. The trail that had once been clear was now twisting, leading them deeper into the storm. Sophia screamed, "This isn't the way down!" Ethan checked the GPS again. The screen flickered, then went black. No map, no signal. They were lost. Mark looked back. His face went pale. They're still coming. Ethan risked a glance. The figures were closer, too close. Their mouths opened, and from their throats came a sound Ethan would never forget. A warped, distorted cry, like Julian's scream, played in reverse. Then one of them lunged. A fall into darkness. Ethan felt cold fingers brush his shoulder. Pure panic surged through him. He twisted away, his foot catching the edge of an icy overhang. The snow beneath him gave way. For a split second, he felt weightless. Then, he was falling. Sophia and Mark's screams faded into the wind. The world spun. Snow, ice, darkness. Then, a crushing impact. Everything went black. Voices in the dark. When Ethan woke up, he was somewhere else. It was still the mountain, but different. The snow here was gray. The sky too dark. And the air, wrong, heavy, thick, like something unseen was breathing beside him. A voice whispered, "Ethan." His breath caught in his throat. Slowly he turned. Someone stood in the snow, just a few feet away. It was Julian, or something that looked like Julian. His face was half-shadowed, his eyes glossy black. Ethan's heart pounded. "Julian!" The thing smiled, and then it took a step forward. The endless descent. Ethan scrambled to his feet and ran. The ground was uneven, shifting beneath his boots like something alive. The air was filled with whispers now. Not just Julian's voice. Hundreds. Men, women, children, all calling his name. The world around him warped. The mountain never ended. Every slope led to another. Every turn brought him back to where he started. No escape. No way down. The truth hit him like a dagger to the chest. He wasn't lost. The mountain wouldn't let him leave. And then, he saw the cabin of the forgotten. A small wooden cabin, half buried in the snow. The door hung open, its interior swallowed by blackness. Something inside was waiting. Ethan knew he shouldn't go in, but the whispers grew louder, and Julian's voice came from inside. "Ethan, I'm here." Tears burned in Ethan's eyes. He had no choice. He stepped inside, the truth buried in snow. The inside of the cabin was wrong. The walls stretched too far, the air thick like molasses. And in the center of the room stood a mirror, tall, ancient. Its surface clouded with frost. Something moved inside the glass. Ethan stepped closer. His breath fogged the surface. And then, he saw them. Julian, Mark, Sophia, himself, all trapped inside the mirror, their faces frozen in silent screams. Ethan stumbled back, his mind shattering. Then a hand grabbed his shoulder, becoming one of them. Ethan turned and came face to face with Julian's reflection. Not Julian, not anymore. Its mouth stretched too wide, its voice layered with 100 others. "You belong to the mountain now." The air collapsed around him. Ethan felt himself being pulled into the glass, into the whispers, into the endless cold. His last thought before darkness swallowed him. No one ever leaves. 1 year later, a new expedition team set foot on Black Ridge Peak. Their radios crackled. A voice whispered through the static. A voice that once belonged to Ethan. "Come up." The mountain was waiting. For them, for the next ones. Because no one ever leaves. Ever.